Okay. So thank you for that. So on to the next session. Welcome to the Metaverse. What is the Metaverse? Well, we'll hear from Vin in a second. Whilst there's no single definition for Metaverse, many believe it to be the next generation of the internet. It's often described as an immersive 3D experience that blends the physical with the virtual. And with that, I'll hand over to Vin. Vin.
Thanks, Stuart. Morning, everybody. Vin Sumner. I run Pixel Mill. We're a visualization studio based in Manchester. I think a few of you know me over the years, been hawking VR headsets around and showing people what's possible and such like. People keep asking me and lots of other people what the Metaverse is. How do I get to it? Is it important? Is it relevant to my business? In the last 6 months, since Facebook, 6 months, 9 months maybe now, since Facebook renamed themselves Meta, it's just become a term that's much more around. I mean, you know, national news, radio programs, you get stories about the Metaverse and people saying what they're doing in the Metaverse. You get stories about people buying up the Metaverse and trading in it and all sorts of things like that. And people say, well, you know, what is it? Is it some sort of new gold rush or whatever? Should I be there? Is it relevant to business? I think what I want to try and put over today is two things, really. What kind of that metaversey thing is, what people think it might be, and the challenges that it has. And then actually step back from it and say, actually, that's probably not really the most important thing for most businesses. For most businesses, there's a lot of technology tools that the metaverse kind of needs, a bit like the gold diggers needed spades and shovels and things. And those are the things that are actually really useful and get you not to worry really about the metaverse, but actually to see what some of those tools can do to help you today. The metaverse may come, it may not, in whatever form it will be, but I think there's lots of technology that's part of that, part of the journey to it, that are actually far more relevant than the metaverse itself. But a few jumbled up in some senses and textual slides to start off with, just to give you a bit of a flavour of the metaverse and what people say about it. So the quote that Stuart just used, yeah. I mean, there probably is a Wikipedia definition which probably keeps changing, but it's some sort of next generation of the internet, some sort of Web 3.0. Again, all these things start off with some definition and then become dangerously just marketing speak if you're not careful. But it's something that seems to blend physical with virtual. And then there's immediately takes you into all sorts of debates about, is there one? Are there many? Who sets the rules? You know, it gets really quite challenging once you get into that sort of space. And that's where things like the metaverse do potentially have some really serious, if you like, policy issues when they start to happen. A few quotes from various people involved in this place. You know, Facebook, their view of it, a lot of viewers that Facebook's view is very much it's a 3D version of Facebook where we may wear headsets or whatever to go wander around it, but we'll just be tracked and put ads in front of us and have experiences that they want their advertisers to get us. Epic, they see it as sort of somehow mixing games with serious with sort of business applications like test driving new cars. Credit Suisse, you know, serious financial people are also looking at this. It's not just sort of gaming world that's looking at the metaverse. So everyone is starting to have a view in some way or other, but it's always slightly different. This is quite a nice little set of events that have happened over time that kind of linked to the metaverse. I think a significant one that for us particularly was back in 2003, a company called Linden Lab launched a platform called Second Life, and we worked in it from about 2004 onwards, and it's probably the nearest thing that anyone's come to a metaverse so far. But there's some real challenges with it, and particularly when we're trying to do business applications in this space, sitting alongside social applications, and that mix is really hard. And then also the rules and laws, legalities in these spaces become really challenging. Then you go through the sort of, the VR headsets becoming more common. And the thing that's probably, as I said earlier, triggered most talk about is just the simple fact that Facebook renamed themselves, or the parent, if you like, Meta, in the last year. But then people put numbers on it. Apparently, $47 billion metaverse market in 2020. I don't know where they calculate that from or what it is. I suspect it's just an amalgamation of all the technologies that might be part of metaverse. So AR, VR, visualization, NFTs, cryptocurrencies, all these things that sit somewhere in the metaverse definition. But it's big stuff. The serious financial people, and forecasters, Bloomberg saying now it's be $800 billion in 2024, and Goldman Sachs saying this is an $8 trillion opportunity. Those are big numbers by any standard. So it's something to be aware of, but I think not to get overawed by it at the same time. The other thing that you get a lot of now is companies, PwC, they used to have a head of immersive. Now he's a head of metaverse. Okay, great. It's becoming a title that people want, because if you're not in the metaverse, then you're obviously not doing the right thing. But I would take that cautiously. I mean, they're probably doing the same thing as they were yesterday, but they've just renamed their job Metaverse. But Facebook hiring 10,000 people in Europe to help build a massive metaverse. We'll see where that appears and what have you. One person, if you're at all interested in this space from a more general perspective, a person to look out and listen to is a guy called Philip Rosedale, who was the founder of Linden Labs and the creators of Second Life, who he subsequently left and does a lot of thinking and talking about it. And a lot of that is about if such a metaverse existed, how open would it be? How would people behave in this space? What would the rules be? Who sets them? We have enough challenges with our politicians and such like now, but just getting them to think about something like this, it would blow most of their heads, I suspect. So I don't know. I think there's, this is the metaverse as the metaverse. It's challenging, it's interesting, and we could have a long debate about some of these sort of things, but I think that they're probably less relevant to your day-to-day business. What is more relevant is the sort of technologies that sit behind it. VR, AR, artificial intelligence. Maybe in some cases things like NFTs, but less so. Perhaps design, 3D modeling, all the things that we talked about already today. All these things are components of what a metaverse would be. So I think it's much more interesting to think about the journey to the metaverse than the metaverse itself. Perhaps in a similar way to, I think I was saying earlier that many people said that most of the money were actually made from the tools and spades in the gold rush rather than actually people who found gold. So it's the tooling in many ways that is the real thing here. And I got a few slides just to sort of link back to construction, your industry, the sorts of things, and a lot of the things have been done already, but I think much more can be done. I mean, we start, what, in the last 2 years, most meetings now, have meetings on phones anymore. At least have video conferences. So people taking a step on the way to this sort of promised land. We're starting to use video conferencing quite heavily. It's been forced to some degree by COVID, but for some people it's actually quite limiting. It's actually quite it's not very inspiring. So you can add to that. You can add more capabilities, and that's what the big operators, the Zooms and Teams and what have you, are starting to do. Clearly, I mean, to an audience like this, 3D visualization is really important. Now we get faster and faster computers. We can render stuff much better, more photorealistic. It doesn't have to be big downloads. You can stream it from the cloud. All these sorts of things. To be able to recreate models of reality, and also things that don't exist in reality. I think there's always a thing sometimes we always have to just create models of of things that exist. And obviously in construction, you want to do that, but you can, alongside it, you can actually create models of something that's kind of just digital rather than perfectly just a representation of the real world. Virtual reality, I mean, since I think last time I came here, I don't know, it was 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years, was it so?
6 years ago.
6 years. 6 years ago, I think I was lugging a HTC Vive around and showing people what was possible with headsets and things like that. And you feel sometimes a bit stupid, don't you? Because people look at you, what's this new toy or whatever it is. But now, you know, most of the large organisations here are probably using them in some way. You know, they're not pervasive, but I think people are starting to use them appropriately, and I think that I would stress that really much. You know, it's not you don't put headsets on for your life, but from time to time, they're really useful. A bit like a magnifying glass, they can give you an added insight into something. But screens are still quite important and easier to use for most people. But yeah, this is part of the journey, as is augmented reality, and there's a lot of work going on sites and things like that, and increasingly so. I think on this side, you know, devices are still a bit limiting, but you know, I think we're expecting in the next couple of years, particularly Apple and others, to bring out devices that are much easier to use and allow you know. There was many of you have heard of the famous Google Glass that kind of was nearly there but not quite. But I think we'll get back to that. Where we have some glasses, you don't have to be holding up tablets or things like that. It's something that's easy to use with your hands being free. But again, these are parts of the technology. Digital twins, Ian's already talked about the national digital twin. I mean, the slight danger with digital twin at the moment, it's a bit like Metaverse. It's one of those terms that, you know, well, what does it mean? It means whatever it wants you to mean on the day. But, you know, there are some definitions of it. And, you know, some representations digitally of the real world that allow lots of different use cases to be operated. I mean, we're actually I'd loosely say it's a digital twin. We're building a digital twin of a new vet school in Kiel at the moment, which is under construction, and we're using effectively a set of digital assets for a whole load of different use cases. The first use case is simply the design and fit out. The second one is going to be a new customer experience because they want to change the way in which people with their animals experience the vet hospital itself. A third one is going to be looking at how processes that aren't visible work, how do they go on. So actually going away from just a representation of the physical world, but actually what else goes on in that building that I can model digitally, which not things I can't see, and then operationally when it's actually live, feeding data back so people can make decisions. So all those things are really powerful. And, you know, yes, one day we all maybe have our avatar representations and we all maybe sat around virtual tables, or actually not actually virtual tables, because this is actually a bad example. Because in a way you don't, if you guys are talking about a bridge or a road or whatever, then you should be on the road and looking at that rather than sat in a conference room. I show this sometimes because a few years ago I did we were doing a project. It was actually in Second Life with a university, and it was an engineering professor who wanted to do some talks in Second Life, and we said, well, we'll build you some space. And I said, what sort of space do you want? He said, well, build me a lecture theatre and build me a screen, and the students as avatars can sit in the lecture theatre, and I can stand at the front and I can do my PowerPoint presentation. And I said, well, why do you want to do that? Well, that's what I do in the real world, isn't it? So I just want to copy what. I said, well, we don't need to do that. We can build you a bridge, because it's an engineering talk, and you can take bits off the bridge and show how it falls down or whatever you want to do. And he just could not get it, and we had to build in a lecture theatre. And then later on, he then said, actually, I'm now starting to think about, actually, we can do more in this space than we can actually do in the real world. So sometimes, and you know, you should think about that as well as just mapping in the digital world, the real world. There might be things that actually are quite, you know, when you're looking at physics and things like that, and show people what's possible. You don't have to have all the rules applying in the digital world that apply in the real world. But it also taught me another lesson, is that there's a journey, and people are all at different stages on that journey. And so you have to take them along that route. So that's what I wanted to say about the metaverse. it's in many ways an exciting, and it's one of those places that you can spend ages debating with people what it's going to be and all that sort of thing and what have you. But from a day-to-day perspective, I don't think I'd recommend anyone here buying up parts of the metaverse for their businesses just at the moment. There may be some crazy, maybe some people are into crypto and NFTs and things like that, and maybe that's their world, but that's slightly different than most people at the moment, at least. But I'd say, look at the tools that we're talking about, make use of those. If you want to have a chat later, I think there's a bit of question and answer now. I've got 2 or 3 minutes, but chat later at coffee about it, the sort of things we're doing, and that would be great as well. So we do this kind of stuff for lots of different people, and happy to chat later. But if there's any immediate questions on the metaverse, then fire away.
So Mr. Zuckerberg ended up in front of the Senate because technology got ahead of legislation.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any risk here? Because obviously construction is a very legislated world, right? So do you think there's any risks in that place?
I think there's great risks of that, absolutely. I mean, a very simple example from Second Life days was that they wanted to introduce gambling in Second Life, and they had to move the servers from California to Nevada because that was the rule at that time. Where the servers were defined it. There are other things where behaviours that avatars were doing were legal in one country and not legal in another country. So you can then start to apply that to safety cases or things like that. Yeah, I mean, and as I said before, finding the politicians that would even start to get their head around this at the moment would be a challenge. Yeah, I think what there's a little small group of people, a guy who used to work at Jaguar Land Rover and who was head of immersive there and what have you, we're trying to get together and start thinking about some of these things so we can actually start being ahead of the politicians and at least have something to say, this is what you should. The social stuff will probably come in some sense, because you get online harm bills and all these, that will get addressed. But how these sort of technologies should be used in enterprise and businesses and how to exactly what you said. I think there's maybe a gap there, and maybe it's something for COMIT to think about. I don't know, be involved in that. Maybe it's a wider group than COMIT, but there's something there. I think, yeah.
There's a question over there.
Hi, my name is Raj. What do you think of Alvaro Sanchez paying several $1 million for a virtual space to have fun in? Does that count as a revenue generation for the metaverse?
Well, I mean, Second Life, people bought virtual land. There's a lady, Ansing Chung, who made several million US buying up digital islands in Second Life, building virtual properties and then renting them out to people. Yeah, it's a valid business. There's some really interesting things. People are buying up space in some metaverses at the moment on the belief that they can then put advertising in them and things like that. They should go back and look at what happened in some of these places. If you try and recreate the real world and say, I'll have these properties and then people have to walk past my shop in order to get to their property in the virtual world, it doesn't work. Because in the virtual world, you can teleport into places. And what happened in Second Life was all the representation of physical shops went out of business, and the big online shop, if you like, it sounds crazy, an online shop within a virtual world, but the online shop where you didn't have to travel anywhere to did all the business. Because the virtual world isn't a representation of the real world. You do things and you behave differently. But as a business, yeah, I mean, it's a valid thing to do.
Excellent. I think that's our time up.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Well, we're absolutely bang on time. Don't you just love it when a plan comes together? So, coffee and networking in the foyer. Spot out there is sat waiting for you. So go and say hello. Tell it to sit, tell it to do whatever. But yeah, thanks. Can I say thank you again to all our presenters and panellists from this morning? Yeah, so big hand for those. Thank you.